In our fast-paced world, it's easy to get swept up in the currents that surround us. But friends, please believe that we, and by we I mean you and me, are each authors of our own life story. We are infinitely capable of creating the change that we want to see both within us and beyond. Welcome to Shaping Freedom, a show where we explore and share practical ways to cultivate extraordinary life experiences. I'm your host, Lisane Basquiat. I'm a teacher, entrepreneur, and life strategist. After a career as a corporate executive, I embarked on my own path of entrepreneurship to focus more deeply on the human and spirit connection that comes with cultivating a deeper and more loving relationship with ourselves. Today, I stand as an advocate for personal growth through internal congruence and spiritual alignment with the ultimate goal of familial empowerment. My life path number is 5, which represents a person who is a freedom seeker with the spirit of change and adventure. This spirit runs through the lineage of my own family, generations of entrepreneurs, artists, and champions of human dignity. This week, I'm joined by a special guest, Luke Iorio. Luke is a longtime friend who is the former CEO of IPEC, the Professional Institute for Excellence in Coaching, which is where I got certified many years ago. He's now a coach, still an entrepreneur, and he currently hosts his own podcast called On This Walk. After going through what he refers to as an epic burnout stage, Luke Iorio recognized that he wasn't in alignment with where he truly wanted and needed to be in his own life. This began a 7-year spiritual journey during which he stepped down from his role at IPEC and included exploring different practices and modalities on his own walk toward a deeper discovery of himself and the real meanings of balance, peace, fulfillment, and freedom. In this episode, Luke and I have a much needed conversation about the sacred messiness of life. We talk about what burnout really means, how one gets to that point, and about how important it is for us humans to create a space to regulate, reflect, and sit in the sometimes uncomfortable space of embracing the unknown. Friends, here is my conversation with Luke Iorio. Luke Iorio, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you, Lisane?
I'm really, really good.
It is so good to see you.
Wow. I don't even know how long it's been.
Yeah. Long time.
I think we had coffee at Panera Coffee.
A long time ago.
Like a
Yes.
very, very, very long time ago. I've
Yeah.
been looking forward to this conversation with you since I had a hit that I needed to speak with you. I was perusing. And I saw an excerpt from your podcast, the On This Walk podcast.
Yep. That's right.
And you were talking about the topic of freedom. And I heard your voice, and I don't remember who you were talking to, but I heard your voice, and I was like, shoot, I have got to get Luke on this. I have to find him and get on this conversation with him. So I'm so excited that you were willing to accept coming
Absolutely.
on to chat with me for a bit.
It was a wonderful surprise to see your name pop up.
So I guess we will get right into it. I invited you on. First of all, why don't you, if you don't mind, share with the audience a little bit about who you are and what you've been up to?
Sure. Let's see. It's a very different who am I than we previously met under. A bit of trivia for everybody is that Lisane and I went through coach training together back in 2005. So 17 years ago. Unreal to think about. I went on actually after training as a coach. Went on to actually become a partner at that coaching school, IPEC, the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. I was partner there, was a CEO, president there, and was with them for close to 17 years. And it was during just an epic time in the coaching industry. People not really understanding what coaching was to today, where it's kind of omnipresent in all these different directions. And as I was about 5 years into being CEO, this is probably 6-7 years ago now, I hit a pretty epic stage of burnout. and hit, kind of one of these stages where all that I had worked for was coming about, it was coming true. And it was like that moment where you're supposed to sit back and go, oh my God, this is incredible. This is wonderful. This is great. And I had nothing left in the tank.
Yeah.
And started to look around and think about how this was everything I had worked for. And I was very fortunate. I was very young in that position as well. And as I started to look around, I recognized I just didn't feel like I was in alignment with where I needed to be in life anymore. And I quite literally needed to kind of close that chapter and begin to set up whatever it was that was going to be next. And I hadn't a clue what that was going to be. And so it began a process of transitioning into to have one of my partners actually step into the CEO role over a couple of year period. And then did some experiments with one of my other business partner for a couple of years to see if we could rejuvenate a few things, and just recognize that that was not in alignment for the business. It wasn't the right thing to do for the Institute. And it was just a fortuitous set of events that actually led to an exit, a very, very good exit from the business, as we were transitioning into some institutional money. And I actually left that business 2 years ago. And in this incredible transitional time that I've been through, I still have a private coaching practice that I still do. I still run a couple of events, run some programs, and most of my time actually is spent on my own podcast, On This Walk, at this point. But in this journey that I've been on for about 7 years since that burnout stage, I have traveled through any number of different traditions. I have started with mindfulness, led me to Buddhism, studied Eastern philosophies and religion and spirituality, took me to Gnosticism and Christ consciousness, which took me to studying with the indigenous, which took me in any number of other directions as well. And it's just been an extraordinary journey all around these questions that I think are, you hold dear on this podcast, around balance, around freedom, around peace, around fulfillment. And have been walking with those questions and all of these different traditions and their approaches to them for the past almost 7 years now.
Wow. I'm speaking to more and more people who are feeling burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
And actually the topic that I'm covering, and I didn't mention this to you before, but the topic that I'm covering throughout the end of this year is the topic of burnout and freedom. And I think that what's happening for a lot of people is very similar to your story, in that they know what they want to get or do, what they want to accomplish. And then you get into that space and it's like, okay, all right, I can, I've checked that off. And I think that what's happening for a lot of people today also is that we've just lived through a really very different and very traumatic, dare I say, and stressful period in our world history. And like many of us who are like survivors, we just like go through it and keep it moving.
Yeah.
And now a lot of folks are starting to feel kind of the residual impacts of that. And so that's why I think this conversation is such an important one, because life is not just about all the doing. I mean, that's great. Yeah. I love to do, right? It's about something else. There's something deeper, there than just what you can check off.
It is. It's, and I think it was two things for me. It was part of what you're addressing, which is that I had chosen a lot of things in my life that, and I got to tell you, it was pretty strange, because I chose a lot of things that I would say were mostly aligned with a sense of purpose and aligned with the values and aligned with things that were very near and dear to me. And we were doing good work in the world. There was a lot of really positive stuff that was coming out of the work that we were doing. And at the same time, they weren't like, some of those things were not chosen from like the deepest, innermost part of me. And so, like you said, I got kind of in that cycle of doing. And I became sort of separate from that which was deepest within me. Mm-hmm. And I think the second thing I recognized was that as I was starting to get in touch with that, as I was starting to connect down, was that we don't have a space that is well respected, that is well honored, better way of saying it, for us to be able to step into and say, you know what, I'm not in the same place that I was when I chose this path 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And I need to re-enter the cocoon, so to speak, because something new is emerging. Well, when we do that and we let go of, or we say we're about to let go of something that has been so central to our life, that is how other people know us, that is probably how we make our living, and all of these other aspects, all of a sudden you feel that pressure of, oh my God, can I tell people I'm really doing this? Like, what are they going to think of me if I just go into this cocoon and kind of shudder and isolate to figure this out? Except that it's to be expected. Nothing is meant to last forever. It doesn't. That's not what this life is. And so for us to be able to create those spaces to honor that time, actually to honor somebody's, position in space, to go in and say, you know what, I want to reevaluate. I want to make these types of changes, and to give them support like the village, as opposed to making them the outcast or making them feel isolated from this process.
I mean, we don't even permission people to go have lunch.
Exactly. Forget major life transitions.
Oh my goodness. If a person's like, hey, like, I want to go take lunch today, it's like, you're slacking, right? Like we just,
Exactly.
I want to continue to invite people to reconsider that we're not robots. We're human beings, and I think that especially for people who are creative and connected, it's so important to give yourself that time to sit down and just think or just be and consider what you truly want. Because I know that whenever a person is able to do that, what they come up with is amazing.
Incredible, right?
It's real. Yeah, you can't just kind of live in these sound bites all the time. It's just not healthy.
And I don't know when this will specifically air, but as we're gathered here today, we're at the very, very end of the fall season, right? And so the leaves are coming down. There's a few that are left kind of hanging on there for dear life right now, trying, right? But it's one of those seasons that as you look around, you can't help but notice nature and the cycles that it goes through. We don't stay in perpetual summer. Even the warmer climates do have the equivalent of a little bit of seasonality to them. But here in the Northeast, it's just completely on display right now. And that's because nature is meant to go through the birth, life, death, and resurrection kind of process and rebirth process. That's what it does. Mm-hmm. We're nature. We're not separate from those processes. And so for us to give ourselves that type of space, because it's in the rest and the repose and the times that we kind of, bring ourselves into that state of turning within, that creativity starts to reconnect, those ideas start to emerge, so that as we move back into springtime, they're ready to be nurtured, they're ready to bloom, they're ready to go. But yet we can't stay there 365. We're not meant to.
No, we're not at all. And there's, creation, transformation, and completion, like everything. There's a cycle for everything. And I think that, I was reading something the other day. I practice theta. I've done a lot of different things since you and I have met, since you and I spoke last also. We'll catch up on some of that offline. Yeah. But, one of the things that I'm realizing is that, we have these different brain waves, and people spend so much time in the beta brainwave. And that is that brainwave where things are, you're making decisions and you're moving, and, we're not meant to be there all the time. With everything, there has to be this moment where we stop and refuel and recharge and see what else is going to come up. I mean, that's why taking a walk is such a healing thing for so many people, because you just get out into nature and connect with nature and allow, the sun, the air, and the earth, and the water to do its thing.
Glad you brought it up that way and brought up theta. What comes to mind when you bring that up is how much time I spend also talking about the idea of a regulated nervous system or a dysregulated nervous system. Because when we are in that perpetual do mode, we're managing all the things, making all the decisions, we're going through that process like you just described. If there is stress that is intertwined there, and let's face it, that's 95% of everybody walking around is some degree of stress.
Yeah.
And that keeps us more and more in a dysregulated nervous system state. And so we don't have the chance to rejuvenate. We don't have that chance to do more generative type of activities. And we're not even replenishing what we're using up. It also means that we have heightened anxiety. That stress is just at a continual building type of a level because we're not doing anything to reset it. And ultimately, it actually will impair cognitive function. It'll impair our decision-making processes, everything else. And so when we do something like simply take a walk or go find a bench, ideally in some natural setting. So either in a park, if that's the closest thing to you, or even better, if you can get out to like a reservation or something like that, and just sit among the trees, sit with the wildlife around you. And even just 15 minutes of that, you will watch your blood pressure. I mean, you'll feel your blood pressure. You'll feel your pulse just slow down and slow down. Your breath will deepen and you're just going to feel a little bit more enlivened. Well, that's your system getting back into a regulated state. We have to prioritize those things though. Just as right? We don't take time for lunch. We don't take time for a walk. We don't take time to go sit in nature. And yet these are vital to us having the type of level of activity and the aliveness within us to do all the things that we may want to do with our lives.
Absolutely. And I think that the gym is different. Working out at a gym is different than going out and taking a walk. They're very different things. There's there's a physical benefit to walking around, but you really get to hit all of those, you get to hit, your spirituality, your mental health, your emotional health, and your physical health. You mentioned during the podcast that I overheard or that I heard this idea of freedom, and you talked about it coming from the deepest part of you. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you know that that's important to you?
That's a good one. That's very good. I think let me describe where I came from to put it in context. And that is that, the definition of freedom that used to make sense to me as I was choosing to go into entrepreneurial routes and things like that was to be able to do what I wanted, when I wanted, with whom I wanted. And it was completely circumstantial. It was all about the outer circumstances were going to constitute whether or not I felt free. And ultimately, I recognized that that was not really the freedom. That was almost like hoping by osmosis that if I had the right circumstances, I would feel free within. But that's what I was after, right? The real feeling I was after was something that wells up from inside of us. And so a few things. I believe that feeling today, I would describe it as peace. Because when we are in that state of inner peace, of inner equilibrium, then all of a sudden we are in a very different relationship with everything that's going on outside of us. We feel more centered, we feel more connected. And so that freedom, the way that I have developed that peace and that inner freedom with my life has really come through learning how to be in dialogue with my deeper self, as well as with the many different parts of me that take me away from that freedom. And so for every single one of us, there is that deeper, still small voice that sort of speaks with this little whisper within us. And it speaks over and over and over again, especially when it knows that we're not on the right track. It's trying to get our attention, but it will never overstep its bounds. It will not trump our free will. It will not say, no, you have to do this.
Yeah.
And that's actually how I started to discover the other voices. Because when I would hear those other parts that come from ego, that come from protector, that come from defender, that come from these other aspects, or inner critic, that's a lovely little guy, is that actually, those were almost coercive type voices. And they would try to get you to feel blame or shame or guilt because it wanted you to stay within this narrow construct of what it felt was safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so it would try to keep me in that type of position. And as I started to pull apart these different voices and just recognize them for their different energies within every single one of us, because we do need protection. We do need occasionally to defend ourselves. We also need the nurturing side of ourselves, and we need the compassionate side of ourselves, and we do need this deeper innermost part of ourselves. And so over time, I quite literally learned how to dialogue with them. My entree into that, I used a lot of journaling, and I would quite literally personify the part of myself that I was trying to speak to. And over time, I literally got to know their voices like you'd know the voices of your family. And you can truly begin to hear that innermost voice. And it's the innermost voice because it actually feels different. you don't hear it like a message. You hear it like the vibration of like, if you've ever gone to a sound bath or heard crystal bowls or a gong or like any of these just really resonant, reverberating sounds, it like rings inside of your body and it rings inside of your heart. Well, that's sort of what that voice is like. And it rises from almost from your core, from your root, your core, and up, as opposed to those voices
That start here.
that start absolutely right here
Yeah.
between the ears, right? And those are, you can tell, those are the voices that are limiting, or they have a very definite agenda. So I don't want to dismiss and make an enemy out of those voices that are trying to keep us safe. It's just that they speak too loudly to us. And so we want to be able to honor what they're pointing out, but we want to be able to let that clear and get back into that deeper innermost voice. And to something you said before, during this crazy couple of years that we have just lived through, I think more people started to hear it because there were more periods of forced quietude in these last 3 years. And people couldn't stay as busy to distract themselves from those inner moments and those inner voices. And now they're starting to hear them and they're saying, wait a minute, there's a couple voices in there that I want to start paying attention to again.
Yeah, and I think that's where this work is so important, because I think when you're I think once a person recognizes that there are different things happening within them and different voices and different thoughts, it's important to give yourself a moment to try to actually understand what's going on. Um, and also to understand what your internal representation and definition is for different words. I wanted to ask you about this word safe. The word safe changes and shifts as you walk your journey.
Completely.
Because once you realize that safe, once you allow feeling safe to be about trusting yourself, then you can allow some of those walls to come down a little bit, right? And once you realize that being safe, that you are safe and you can trust yourself, then your relationships with other people and your relationship with yourself, the most important relationship ever, becomes a clearer one, where you're not, living under the guidance of a definition of safety that tells you to step away from yourself, to cover yourself up, to put up the walls, to, not be vulnerable and all those things,
That is great noticing to pick up on safety in that way and to articulate it, to pull it apart, to parse it a bit, because there is so much of when we're developing that, through our early years and into adolescence, the safety at some point is physical, right? Because we need to be protected for many years. We have to be protected by our parents, and hopefully we are. Not everybody gets that environment. And so physical safety is a critical first stage. That physical safety, which usually has an element of emotional safety as well, ultimately gravitates towards social acceptance, because we're trying to fit in, right? And we're trying to kind of move usually a little bit away from the family, to individuate. And we're trying to then become accepted in certain social settings. And that's the wonderful, awkward years of adolescence that usually extend way too long into our 20s and then some maybe
Yes.
30s, 40s.
We don't want to
50s,
let go of
anyone?
that.
And we don't want to go too far there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so there's all of that. But to your point, at some point, and I think it's really what is waking up, which is causing these questions around burnout and what you've been describing, is that we're starting to wake up to the fact that we want to feel safe within ourselves, meaning to be ourselves, to trust ourselves, to walk our own path, because it's something I've pointed to for many years. Was that many years ago I read a very, very famous blog article turned book by Bronnie Ware called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And the number one regret is that I wished I'd had the courage to be true to myself as opposed to the expectations of others. And I think more and more people are beginning to wake up to that feeling of, I want to have the courage, I want to feel safe enough to be true to myself. and they are beginning to recognize it can only come from themselves. The circumstances around you will never always be perfect for you to emerge into. It's you that has to do the emerging. And when you show up that way, that's when the environment around you begins to change. And you're confident enough that if it doesn't, that's okay. I've got other places I can go.
And I think also there's this perception talking about, anxiety and burnout and stress related, discomforts. I think that what happens a lot of times is that we're so quick to handle those symptoms that those voices that we're talking about, kind of step in and move us away from really paying attention to the communication that's happening, because the communication that's happening right now in the world, or at least in our world, here in this country, is we need to do things a little bit differently. Seeing a lot of people who are going through burnout all at one time, or a lot of folks, this pattern of depression and anxiety, it's like we take those things and we just toss them into the salad of everything else that we're chattering about on social media, in the world, on the news, and within ourselves, and, sitting around our dinner tables. And I don't think they do water coolers anymore, but I think you get the gist, and we're just chatting about those things almost as if we're sitting on the bleachers watching a game, when in fact, this is really important information for us, that maybe, just maybe, disregarding yourself is not the best thing to do. Maybe creating a list of things to do without also integrating your own being or your own check-in with yourself as we pass from one stage of development in our lives to the next. Maybe we just need to be doing things a little bit differently and honoring our humanity a little bit more.
I very much agree with that. I also want to say it a little bit further. I think we need to honor things falling apart,
Mm.
in that there is, if we are hitting those stages within our life, there are things that are meant to be dying. There are things that are meant to be let go of. And to your point, I think it's part of the suffering I see inside of society right now, is so much of trying to cling, to hold on to what was, to not let go, to no, I'll find a way to keep it going. And anytime I realize that maybe I can't, I'll distract myself with something else. I'll find a way to whip myself up into a frenzy and get right back at it again. I, guilty. Okay. I did it. It's what led to ultimately burnout, was, me trying to hold on to something that was changing. And I was trying to hold on to what it had been, and I was trying to hold on to what I thought it was in my mind. Another aspect that was really a challenging aspect of all of this, I had to say goodbye to the future that I had been working towards, because now that future was no longer going to be true, because it needed to change. So I kept holding on to all of these things until life literally brought me to my knees. And I had no way of continuing to move forward in that way. My eyes were opened in that regard, I guess you could say. But we need to find a way of honoring that which is falling apart for each other. We need to honor it in our own lives, to be able to give ourselves permission to let things fall apart, to give ourselves permission to let go of things that are no longer working, to give ourselves permission to take space. Probably the most difficult one that I struggled with, and occasionally still do, I had to give myself permission to not know how this is going to work out, to not know what the next step is, to not know how it's going to finally come back together again. And that was really, really scary, with two kids that are just now in high school, and being the provider in playing that role primarily anyhow inside of the household. It's really scary to think about those things. And I had to, it was still true, whether I looked at it or not. It was still there. And so I needed to honor what I was going through. I needed to honor the anguish. I needed to honor the grief and some of the sorrow that was there. I had to honor those things and allow them to fall apart. What I can say now, but did not know at the time, was that they were falling away. But I didn't know that. Now I can say they were simply falling away to make room for something new that was going to be more congruent to where I was now in my life and from a deeper part of me. But that never would have been possible if I just kept holding on to all these pieces.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that's such a story, the story for so many people who are struggling with, but wait a minute, I may not like this thing and it may not be great for me, but it's all I know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
especially when a person has planned for their future, when you're looking out, and even if the things are shitty, it's like, I envision my shitty future with
Right?
these shitty things.
But it's the one that I know.
It's the one that I know, and it's okay because I know how to play in this territory. What's scary is, what can be scary is when you have no idea what allowing things to fall away is going to leave you with. I've certainly experienced that twice in my life. And thank you for bringing that up, because I think there are a lot of folks who are holding on to things for that very reason, because, letting go of things can be painful. It can be painful. It can be, that uncertainty is, scary.
Yeah.
That's just it. It's scary. And I think that that's one of the positive consequences, dare I say it, about what we've just gone through, because nobody knew.
Yeah.
And we were all kind of in that space at the same time. And then it just became a matter of like what we were willing or able to do with that set of circumstances.
Yeah. There's something in there that I think you're also scratching at. It's because I think you're creating some of this space here on the show. It is a very, very intentional aspect of what I'm doing with On This Walk, is creating a space for people to express truly what they are feeling and the story, the narrative that's been weighing on them
Absolutely.
as they're going through these transitions. Because I had another previous very successful podcast. It was a very typical interview show, and interviewed the authors and the speakers and the whatever, the so and so's, and I got the parts there that were sharing of like the success, and this is how I achieved things, and this is how I got to here, and everything else. Listen, there's a time and place for that, and it can be really inspiring. Get that. Right now, I think we need to see more people that are in the sacred messiness of life and doing it more together.
I agree.
Right? How many people are struggling with burnout? I just went through this. So the other day in one of the groups that I participate in, an individual had spoken up about the fact that he voluntarily accepted a reduction in workforce so he could make a change. And he did not know, obviously, that around the corner was going to be a significant change in the economy. And so he has now been out of work for a lot longer period of time than he was looking to be. He's been walking around within this group without telling anybody what he was going through up until the other day. And now that you can literally see like a little bit of ease, like returning to his shoulders, a little bit of weight, because people are like, well, I can totally help you out. Here's some other people that I know tell me more about this. Tell me more about this. What are you looking for? And you can watch everybody say, no, come on. We're in this together. And a bunch of other guys being able to raise their hands and say, man, I've been there at least 3 times in my life. So come on, we can do this together. And but until we express, until we name those things, until we talk about those things, we don't really get any type of change because we're not bringing it to light. And we need to bring it to light.
And I think, it's understandable sometimes because, a lot of us, I know I was raised where, you keep that stuff inside, like, somehow or another, like being less than human equated to weakness, or that's the way I kind of received that programming. And it helped me in a lot of ways because it made me a person, or trained me to be a person that can do a lot of things and accomplish a lot of things. And it also created this wall within myself where I was so committed to making sure that I looked like I had my shit all together, that I stepped away in some ways from myself. And I had, a moment, very similar to what you're describing. And it happened in my personal life, a breakup of a relationship, from someone that I loved very, very much. And I was in this place where I just could not hold it all in. I couldn't. I could not, you know. And I got to this moment in my life where it was like, that voice within me was coming up like, all right, you're ready. Let's talk, Lisane. Like, what's going on? And walking through that journey, I felt compelled to bring people in, people that I trusted, people that I felt safe with, to have conversations with them. And a lot of things fell apart all at the same time. And for once in my life, I would always have either work or a personal relationship, right? There was always something that I could fall back on and bury myself in. And I had none of that. And it created this situation where I really had to listen.
Yes.
And allow some things to fall away. And I made the commitment that I was not going to run out and get a new relationship, get a new thing. I was going to experience this and understand, and was willing to understand what these circumstances, this crossroad in my life had showed up for, like what it was really there to teach me. And it's not always easy to do because we like the comforts.
Absolutely.
We love the comforts,
To this whole conversation, I just want to applaud and honor the courage that it takes for you to create and take that space, because that's so much of what we all would prefer to do, right? Is to go run out and stay busy and distract, or, something's not going right at work, so we're going to pour ourselves into a relationship, or something's not good with a relationship, we're going to pour ourselves into our health and fitness, whatever it is. And so we keep ourselves distracted without allowing ourselves to just be in the falling apart and the falling away,
Right.
and allow what's going to come up to emerge, and to connect to that part of ourselves that we probably haven't connected with in decades.
Right. Or ever.
Or ever. And that was a, anyway, you speak very, very, very much to so much of what I also experienced, as you noted, and at different stages. And I guess maybe I'm curious for you, what do you remember when you were going through that process and you created that space for yourself? What did you start to hear within yourself that was maybe the seeds of where this journey is leading you now?
Wow, Luke. Um, Couple of things. What I started to see was the patterns that we go through in life where, you have a job that you don't like, I don't like the manager, I don't like the thing, I don't like the company, I don't like the whatever. I'm going to dump it and move on. And then we go and we find the same thing somewhere else with a different name, a different company, a different logo on the paycheck. When we're in relationship, we don't like the relationship, that person not working for me. So we go and we find another person with a different face, a different name, same relationship. And what happened for me was I had those moments where in my whining and grief and feeling totally helpless and sad, I heard myself saying to myself, yeah, he sucks. He didn't hear you. He didn't understand you. This didn't happen. That didn't happen. But you know what? I was talking to you the whole time and you didn't hear me either.
Mm.
And the conversation in my head shifted to, why aren't I listening to myself? Why didn't I trust myself? Because it wasn't about what that person was doing. It wasn't about that. Even though there were some things that were happening on that person's journey that affected me negatively and that I felt pain, having experienced. But it really was not about that person. It was about the ways that I was justifying my own decisions, the ways that I was rationalizing and telling myself to, like, it's okay, we're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
Because, we're going to figure this one out. It was that. And so that was the catalyst. And it happened at a time where I had done a lot of work. Like, it wasn't like 2 days ago. Like, I had done a lot of work at that point. But it was that layer. It was that really tender layer within my heart, beneath a lot of work that I had done, a lot of things that I had released and developed and grown through. It was that final piece that, like, until you improve the relationship that you're in with yourself, until you start to listen to yourself and love yourself and ask yourself the same questions that you would ask of someone outside of yourself, you're going to be in patterns and cycles that are not healthy for you. So that's what it was.
That's beautiful. And
it was painful as shit.
It was,
and it was
absolutely painful, right?
It was so painful. I was like,
it is so
wait a
awful.
minute.
Like, I don't want to do this.
I was like, but he, they, she, them, my parents, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, that's easy. It's easy for me to sit here
Completely.
and read you, Luke, like, oh, but when there's no one, and so I changed the direction of my conversation. It became more about, like, all right, let's check in here first. Let's straighten this out.
Yeah.
And then we'll deal with people outside of me.
You labeled a quality in there, which is one I wanted to add back to the question you had asked me before about how do you recognize that freedom? How do you recognize that voice? Is you use the word tender.
Mm.
And there is this tenderness, and that means there's vulnerability. It means that it can be very scary.
Mm-hmm.
It means it can be and feel very fragile. And it's difficult when that part of us feels touched. And it holds such incredible power and beauty and honesty. And it holds more and more of the essence of what each and every single one of us actually is.
Mm-hmm.
You describe this process of what you went through, and that you ultimately had to take a look at everything that was going on and reflect it back on yourself and say, okay, I'm the common denominator. This is what I gotta go through this. And it reminds me of the message that I had received. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but that after a very, very rough year and coming to the end of it, going to the fourth funeral that I'd been doing about a 10-month period, and the last of which was with a role model. And I came home that day. Dawn, my wife, had dropped me off. She was going to run some errands before picking up the kids. And I come back to the house, and it had been a rough day. This was this was the moment that I could no longer walk away from burnout. Like, it was right there. And I get to the house, and I'm not 10 steps into the house, and I just collapsed to the floor sobbing, and just everything pouring out of me. And if you look up definition of ugly cry, I checked all the boxes on that one. And after however long, I have no idea how long I was on the floor, I realized, okay, I want to pick myself up. My family, my kids are going to be home soon. And, as the typical stereotypical hard-headed male, I don't want them to see me this way. And so I go to clean up upstairs, and I get changed and head over to the sink to splash some water in my face. And as I do that, I pick my head up, and I'm now looking in the mirror. And as I do, I come face to face. I catch my eyes. I catch that gaze. And all of a sudden I feel like I'm looking back at my 5-year-old self. And I make contact with that consciousness that has always been there throughout the entirety of our lives. And even though there's, some gray hair and some wrinkles there now, I could just feel the purity of it, that it had not changed. And this feeling starts to almost overwhelm me. I feel it kind of coming up from my gut. And as it's rising, I begin to recognize that in making this connection with this part of my consciousness, the feeling that was rising was rage. And I just felt this tremendous anger come up, and I feel it hit my throat. And I turned to the mirror and look at that part of myself and say, where did you go? Why did you leave me?
Mm.
And of course, the humor of yelling in a mirror is it comes
Wow.
back at you.
Everything in life is a mirror.
Right? Everything in life is a mirror. And I got a very literal moment of it.
Yes.
And it just made it so clear to me in the clarity that came back was that, of course, that part of ourselves, that part, whether we want to call it soul, spirit, consciousness, essence, whatever you choose, the force, whatever word works for you, right? It's never left us. It is always there, just as you described, always talking, always there, always listening, always sharing, always trying to connect with you. It's us that walk away from it, chasing what we think are the goals, are the achievements, the things of life. And that moment, which was literally the moment that changed everything in terms of the course of direction that I then pursued, is all about how do we get back home again? How do we find that place, right? How do we connect to that place within ourselves? And once we have that relationship, as you described, once we have that relationship on solid ground in trust and in faith and in confidence, how do we build our lives from there? Building truly from the innermost, the deepest, most part of ourselves outward into our lives. But you got to go through the process that you were sharing, process I'm sharing. It don't come easy.
Not at all.
You got to go into the cave.
Yeah, you have to give yourself and your life permission to hold more of you, to expand into your life, to just be more of you. That's the key. I promised you that we would end at a certain time, and I don't live with regret, but I really do regret that I got stuck in traffic because I have like another hour in me to talk with you.
I'll tell you what, this came to me while we were talking. Why don't we do part 2 on this walk?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
We'll pick up this conversation, and that way we can coordinate it.
Let's do that. Before we end this, really quickly, I'm going to ask if you can do this in like the 30 seconds that you have. 3 things that a person in your shoes, a person who's like in that moment in the mirror, just so we don't leave people hanging with that. 3 things that you can offer, 3 things that a person can do, or 1 thing, just something, some nugget to leave for a person who may be in those shoes right now.
I think there are a couple things. First thing that came to me is before you even find a place to express, so you know what number 2 or number 3 is going to be, is to take some period of time out in nature. I use this language, go befriend a place. Meaning find, whether it's in a park or at a riverside or a pond or a lake or a forest that you can walk through. Find a place where you can sit and get to know it and allow it to get to know you. And I mean this quite personally. And the reason being is that when we truly befriend a place, befriend nature, we begin to reconnect with the aliveness that is in all things. And when we are burnt out, we're not feeling that aliveness anymore within ourselves.
That's right.
And so when we can go and truly just lose yourself in the imaginal, don't refer to the birds or the trees or the squirrels as its. Give them a name. Mm-hmm. Refer to them, talk to them like you were talking to a friend, and allow them to talk to you. See what gets mirrored back to you. See what rises up within you from just being in the energy of it. That's the first thing I would do, because it gives us space. That the other beauty about being in nature that way is it doesn't judge you. right? You don't have to worry about
Just
it.
you
I
and
promise you, just you and nature. That's it.
That's
Go
it.
out with great
Yeah.
mother, and I promise
Yeah.
you will be accepted.
Absolutely.
Always for your
Absolutely.
glory. And
Absolutely.
that allows you to start to reconnect to that part of yourself, because you will begin to hear that innermost voice that you, Lisane, and I were talking through, is you're going to start to hear that rise. And then the second thing is I would find a place to express,
Mhm.
whether that is with a coach, a mentor, a guide, circling, a group, a church group, anything, right? Anything that you feel it may be a little bit of an edge, right? Because if it's expressing, you could feel very vulnerable to put yourself out there. And if you can find something that feels a little safer, that feels a little more trusted, lean into that. There are many groups and coaches, guides, and stuff that do that. But to be able to start to verbalize so that you're not stuck ruminating, you're not stuck with this weight that is on you that you're walking around with. We need to learn how to lay that down. And we can't lay that down if we can't talk about it. And it's whether we're talking about these types of transitions all the way to the depths of things like mental health and otherwise, we've got to be able to talk about this. And we've got to be able to hold the space for others to talk about it as well. Give them that, honor that. Those are the first two things I would say. And I think the third, which helps with expression, is journaling was incredibly important to me during that period
me too.
of time.
Every day of my life.
Right?
So helpful.
I journaled in dialogue, meaning with the different parts of myself. And quite honestly, I journaled with the divine. And I allowed that to feel like there was a connection that was meant to come through and help me sort through everything that I was processing and trying to feel again into my life. And so whatever it is for you, whatever those archetypes, those energies, or those parts of self, or if it is a higher power for you, bring that into your journaling. It doesn't have to be, okay, this is what I did today and blah, blah. No, create questions, create conversations, and allow it to come alive until you feel like personally it's like having a relationship again.
Yeah.
It begins to move through you.
Absolutely.
So I did have three things.
You did. Luke, I love you so much. I appreciate you so much. We've known each other for a long time. And we don't talk very often, but every time that we
Good when we do.
Yeah. So we're going to talk again.
We will.
And we're going to continue this conversation on another platform soon, hopefully.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for coming by. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisane.
I hope you found today's conversation with Luke Iorio inspiring. Please do check out part 2 of this discussion on Luke's podcast, On This Walk. You can find a link in the show notes. Before we go, please be sure to take some time out in nature and go make friends with and connect with a place, any place that feels good to you. It can be a park, a pond, a lake, a beach, the mountains, or some woods that you can walk through. It doesn't matter where it is, as long as it's a place where you can simply be in its presence and allow it to be in yours. Get to know what is around you. You will know that it's the right place when you've connected enough, just as you would with a friend, to truly see how alive we are in concert with all things. There is life all around us. Sometimes when we're feeling burnt out, we can begin to lose glimpses of that aliveness within ourselves. Connecting with nature reminds us that we are not alone. Thank you for taking time out of your day to be in this space with me. I truly appreciate you.